Even before you contacted me, you'd done enough freaking work, you know?
Yeah, no, I feel like I've done a lot of work.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, and it's,
Well,
uh,
and too, the other thing is that you have been very food righteous. Hold on, I gotta get this on camera. Oh, it is on camera. Okay. Um, let me get
yes,
my.
I had been very food righteous.
Yeah, that's another thing that I find really difficult. Clients of mine that are not so food righteous, the ones that are just super body image oriented around the way they look, as much as that's really
Right.
difficult to separate from, and I don't want to diminish how hard it is for people that just have straight body image attachments, it's just as horrific and scary. However, their recovery process tends to be a little shorter, a lot easier than someone who gets that pride and arrogance around food righteousness on top of
Yeah.
body image righteousness. So when someone's like, I've researched and I know how this is healthy for you, and they get that real self-righteous, um, it's that health righteous that I talk about versus the thin supremacy.
Right.
That, you know, there's those are two separate body image issues. When the client I'm
Yeah.
working with has both, oh, it's really hard because they have so much arrogance and pride. And again, that holier than thou concept of healthy eating that they have to dismantle. And that's hard to do because you have all the evidence and the research. And I've been on these blogs and forums and I've heard people talk about how important it is in their life and it's changed their life and they don't poop anymore. And they never fart or have flatulence in their skin and they're like 20 years younger, even when they're like, you know, aging. There's this weird fantasy around how important their healthy eating is that they are so prideful and won't let go. And you fit in that category,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
right? So
Yeah, and I mean, I was at the place where I was like, but I have to keep my family safe, you know?
yeah, I love that you just
And
said that because that's also very that's understandable, right?
right,
If
because
you
like
have a
that's my
fear.
job. Like
Yeah, if you
that's
have a
totally my
fear
job,
and a
right?
belief of safety, you're going to project that onto your family because you want them to be safe too. This is how religious zealotry passed down through families and generations. I look at my parents, they really felt strongly about the safety of the religious ideology that they believed in and that their parents believed in and you know were persecuted for. You know, there's that identity around it. And so that's a great example for you to maybe have compassion for your mom and how you were raised. Like this is how we pass down problems through generations, right?
Right, right,
I think it's important too to say that that's not always a bad thing, right? If there is a current issue that is life and death threatening, it would make sense that I would want to make sure my kids have protection from that life and death threat, that it's currently occurring and they can currently be aware of it happening. But what happens as, you know, as there's trauma in a generation, let's just use the World War II generation. There's trauma, literal trauma. They go through the depression. They're seeing people die, disease, starvation, and that can really create a fear of death, life of death, and so they're going to overreach to try to keep. You're going to force your kids to eat the food. You're going to force them to really understand how important that food is, even though they don't have a reference to that trauma to understand it, right? So you have to pass down the trauma through ideology for them to try to hold on and grasp this kind of zealot type of behavior. The issue is when reality is no longer matching that coping mechanism.
right.
Right? Because this was where, like, I could understand if I was, you know, in the 1900s, why I would grasp so tightly to that religion, especially if it was being um, seen as a bad religion or something, why I would really need to grab tight to it. Whereas when you live,
Well, yeah, and it was also it also protected you from, like, it was your pack, it was your
Yes, my tribe.
It was your community, and so you were protected. If you believed it and you bought into it, you were protected from the rest
Correct.
of humanity, from
Yeah, it gave you a sense of purpose.
Attack, or the railroad guys coming through and killing everyone. Like,
correct.
You were protected because you were part of that
tribe.
pack.
You got it. So this is why it's like, stop judging yourself in the relation in how you responded to this kind of food righteousness, especially too with people who've actually had physical ailments, and then they go to get help and they put all their eggs in one basket, as if food is the solution. And there's so much of that being sold right now, that food is the solution. If we can fix your food, your whole entire body's going to change. That's a gamble. Don't you agree? No one's questioning that.
It's what?
It's a gamble. You're gambling like this. If we look at the spectrum of what creates equilibrium in the body, is it 100% food? No, we're talking how much sun are you getting? How much sleep are you getting? How much psychological stress are you experiencing? There's and those are just a few of a humongous rainbow of things that you have to look at. And what you're finding is when people go to the internet for help, they're going to be sold. There is so much selling on the internet about specifically that food religiosity around how you eat will fix everything. It'll fix your marriage. It'll fix your skin. It's going to fix your digestive system. It's going to fix your sex drive. It's going to fix your entire sense of well-being and your confidence in the world. Like, food is the only solution. But it's not just food. It's how you restrict food that they're selling. So it's so tiny. It's like a tiny little box of solution that people are putting all of their power to. All of it. You're dedicating everything to a food restriction around what well-being is. And you can't tell that you're starting to create psychological problems. And you would never think, because you never question the food ideology, that might be actually creating problems that are promoting this behavior that creates what you're trying to fix, right? So my point is that when someone goes into food solution, that is the only solution, that's the main focus I'm going to take on, because I went to the internet and there's all this evidence and all these people promoting it. Why not? It's worth a try. But you don't realize that what you're putting into this is you're really putting a lot of eggs in one small basket in the scope of a big problem. That could be a variety of triggers, right? A variety of actual causes. You're not questioning where the cause is. Because if it's a food cause, then a food solution would make sense, right?
Yeah.
No one's questioning that in that scope, right? It's no different than having that tunnel vision of, your issue is you need to go to church. Like, that's going to solve all your problems, right? A lot of people feel that way. They literally have that emotional safety and euphoric high from that safe environment. So when you go to the internet, there's plenty of people who have orthorexia who want power to tell you how to eat pure and superior ways as well. And you're putting yourself into that. And if you in any way attach to that superiority, oh shit. That's why this becomes so hard to let go of, because you truly believe that the solution to your true legitimate ailments is dieting. So it's not just thin supremacy. It's the fear of disease and death, which is what we were talking about. And the fear of disease and death in your own family, the people you love, right? That you'd have to back out and realize, in order for me to back out, I have to really accept the fear that has been driven into my brain, that I have all this fear. And does that fear make sense? Right. The other thing that I had to do, and then what I obviously am hoping that you did this week, that's why you're feeling so different, is that you compared that fear. When I say go to the worst case scenario, because that's really what's hijacking your brain. It's not rational. It's not neutral, right? Clearly your behavior shows an extreme response, right? That angst that you were experiencing, that anger, that I can't do it, I can't do it, I can't do it, that panic, that anxiety you were experiencing. That's a sign that this isn't a neutral, logical framework. That your fear is equal to that anxiety, that it's pretty big. So you have to go into that fear and assume that's the case, because that's the only way to release yourself from the fear of that, is to go into that occurring.
Oh my God, that's what I did. That's what I did.
And as you, but here's what we were just saying. Before, we've worked together for quite some time now, and we've had this, and you've had recovery, but it was never really fully there. You always kind of maybe put a pause on this idea. You were just in the immediate needed relief from the insanity. So for that moment, you were willing to put a pause on your thin righteousness or your healthy concept of eating. You just put a pause on it. When you put a pause on something like that, that's like saying, I'm going to come back to that later. But for now, I got to take a break. I got to get my mind together. It's understandable, right? It's like saying, again, with that religious parallel, I'm going to take a break from this religion, but I know I'm going to go back.
Right.
Because I still believe that it's true, and I still believe that even though psychologically I'm struggling in it, I'm not functioning well. I'm not adapting to reality in any way. I feel inadequate, insecure. I'm having overreaching coping mechanisms. I can't handle reality. So when I feel that my life is stable again, and I feel like I've had enough freedom to breathe, I'll go back to that cage or that constraint. And that's more than likely what you did unconsciously. Or was it conscious?
No, I think it was conscious because I was always waiting to get to the place where we said, okay, you're healthy now, so now it's just about maintenance. Go ahead and do the maintenance.
Right. You know, yeah, and you probably
we talked about like, you know, it's kind of like getting your nails done. Like you just have to have the right attitude about it, and then you can go get your nails done again.
Yeah. Yeah, and you were in that still holding the idea that getting your nails done is really important to your self-worth and self-esteem. Yeah. So, and the other part of this is sometimes people think I'm crazy, and they'll go, Robin just doesn't know. Robin just doesn't get it. She doesn't know how it feels to be overweight. She doesn't understand the physical problem. So that can also kind of change how you use the guidance I'm giving you. That might have happened too. I'm okay with it. I understand that.
I think we talked about like how afraid I am of diabetes because my dad has it and he controls it through diet and exercise, and I'm convinced that I wouldn't get it because I'm so health righteous, right? And I had been assuming that what I was having, I think I'm hypoglycemic or whatever, however you say that. And again, I don't want to like get into health stuff that I'm just totally conjecture, but I thought they were panic attacks or that I was having PTSD, and it happens like because it happens in my car, but I realized it happens because of the time of day too, and what is happening in my body is that I'm hungry.
Yeah, yes.
So,
and hunger will make your whole system shorter, like less patient. It's like PMS in a moment, right? Yeah, I would agree.
Well, it's pretty intense though. Like I've been trying to find a doctor to go to because there's like basically no one will see me that's an insurance doctor here. All the people that will see me are $700 an hour, and it's really hard to find a doctor that understands.
Got it.
Like the hormone protocol that I'm on and whatever. Anyway.
Okay. Pause that for a second. Okay, going back to what we were talking about. Okay, going back to, the accepting of your worst case scenario, going into what if I get diabetes, if I let this go. I've been brainwashed to believe in my own pride, my own judgment of my father, and my own belief system that if I do what I'm doing, I won't have this happen. But what you're doing is ultimately miserable. And the evidence is showing it's promoting this distorted behavior with food anyways. So when you go into what we were talking about is if you go into that fear before you were like, yeah, sure, I can accept this, but it's only temporary. And you never really looked at it. You never really breathed it into your lungs, right? The way I describe it, like taste it, let it. The problem is that when you position yourself there, it feels like it's permanent, like it's going to happen if I look at it. If I pay attention to that and actually open my mind, it feels like it's going to be permanent, and I don't know if I can handle it. That's the weird fight or flight response that people get to even just staying overweight or obese too. It's not just that I could get disease, which is what you had to take on too, but to actually look at that as if it's real, right? To go into this as if it's permanent, if it's real. If I let this crazy shit go, my fear is telling me that the worst case scenario is going to happen. So what you end up doing is you compare the worst case scenario to what you're doing. And then you get a grade around which one's worse, how much longer can I do this, right? Last time we talked, you were like, I cannot handle this fear. I can't do that. I refuse to do that. This is terrible. I can't do it. And I was like, that's fine. I understand how that feels. I really do. It's terrifying. And not only that, but you feel shame attached to it and failure. There's all those emotions that you've attached to it as well. So we had suggested you should, instead of just sitting here in angst around not being happy about what's going on, but not really wanting to do anything about it, let's do something about it. And I had said, let's go on the protocol. And you're like, I would rather do a cleanse. And I was like, sweet. So last week, when I left our conversation, I was like, so go through a cleanse. I'm all for it. I'm not judging you. I think that's a important part of the process. You may end up feeling so good. I was preparing for this call today for you to go, I feel so much better, Robin. I was preparing for that. Because as your coach, as your guide in this recovery process, psychological recovery, I have to some degree, give you a sense of reality and allow you the freedom to go with where your brain is taking you. Right? I can't force you or control you to do anything. So being that you were having that, if you had that euphoric, like, it's amazing, my life is amazing, I would have been like, sweet, do it another week. Let's talk in a week from now, right? You didn't even get that far. I called and was like, how'd it go? What was the cleanse like? I'm super curious. And you were like, I didn't even get there because in the thinking about it, it was just like, So and then you had said, I had to look at the permanence of this then, because I knew would you agree? Because you were so definite around I can't do it anymore. I cannot suffer like that. I will not do it. You had to then at that point really open your eyes.
I think that my physical limitations came up because I was like, well, if I do a cleanse, then what's going to happen when I'm in the car at 3 o'clock trying to pick kids up and shuttle kids around? And I have that panic attack thing where I have to eat. And then I started to think about, well, that sounds really familiar because other people I know have that thing where they have to eat. Like, they can't wait one more minute where they have to eat.
Yes.
And I'm like, okay, so what is that? And then I go, that's diabetes. That's, sugar.
Low blood sugar.
Right.
That's not diabetes. That's called low blood sugar. Diabetes is when you're not functioning and your blood sugar's high all the time. Okay? But however, one of the symptoms of diabetes is the massive movement between the two. Okay? So at the time you're actually hungry, you're not actually in a state of diabetes. I don't know if you knew that.
No, I don't know anything about it.
Okay, don't worry about it. So don't create drama where there is none. Okay? So, hold on a second.
Right.
Because you're going back into that orthorexic, I got to manage and control this, oh my God. But the reality is, when it comes down to doing a cleanse, is this really something that you believe is going to give you a reward? Is it going to be rewarding inherently as you do it? You're having those drops in blood sugar and you're not on a cleanse.
Right. And so I was like, I can't do a cleanse because I can't. I have to take responsibility for somebody else's well-being, and I can't be in that panic of where's the food.
So do you want to do a cleanse?
Well, no, I don't.
Okay, so that's the truth.
I don't.
So we can say it's because I don't want to do that for them.
I did.
But the key here is if you go into your heart and soul, do you really want to do a cleanse? Let's go there. The reality is you can say it's because of that, and that could be true. But if you actually told the truth of like your heart and soul, do you want to do it?
Yeah, I don't know. I can't.
Your first answer was no.
I'm not that in touch with it. I'm not that in touch with it. I mean, if it was something that was on the table that I was able to do that would be rewarding. No,
That's the key.
I don't think I care anymore.
The key is that is it really that rewarding? You've done it before.
Right.
And you can get that you're actually getting more reward the moment you decide to do a cleanse. You're super fucking high as a kite in that moment because of the fantasies of what you think it's going to do for you.
Yeah,
That's that illusion of reward is so euphoric.
I don't know if I was ever there. I really don't. I don't know if I ever had that like, wow, this is going to be great.
You might have in the
like
past.
I said before, maybe I didn't suffer enough.
Well, that's what we've talked about is the lack of suffering and then the fantasy of something better. It's kind of hard to not go into the fantasy of the betterment if you really aren't suffering all that well, or you're getting off on what you're doing. There's a benefit, right? That's the benefit of the health righteousness. You're getting something out of it that creates a sense of equilibrium with whatever sacrifice it takes. On a side note, right? So you had said to me, and maybe that feeling is now gone, right? Who knows why? But you had just said to me 20 minutes ago, something shifted this week. There was a major shift this week. Something changed.
Yeah. I think I finally listened to the, your advice to think about my grandparents and think about the shame and sadness and just get more in touch with that. And the fear. And I thought about it finally without looking away from it. I just let it sit,
And what would your life be like if that was it?
No, I just did more work around like the shame that I felt in the way that my family looked, and how how sad that is that I carried that around for so long, and that didn't just love them for who they were.
Yeah, you were too caught up in judging the body than you were judging the reality of who they are. Yeah, you were too caught up in the superficiality and feeling that they were a source of inferiority for you.
Yeah. And like that those are my grandparents that are fat, and I don't want to go there, and I don't want to be associated with them, and there's something wrong with them.
When in reality there was something wrong with your psyche, right? There was something wrong in your head. Right? That superiority at a young age, sense of fear of being like, I don't want to be, it's inferior. They're inferior to me, your own grandparents, right? So knowing that ahead of time and how that's actually impacted you, because it has impacted you. It's impacted the way you're responding to your own body, hasn't it?
Yeah.
It's impacting this shame, fear. It's actually a big foundation of it. And has been for a long time, right? So knowing what you know now about how ignorant you were nowhere close to reality, right? Would you take on that same perspective with your current wisdom?
No.
Yeah. This is where you don't have to be stuck in your ignorance anymore. You can go into current wisdom, which removes that ignorance. And it changes how you respond. Changes how you respond to your own body and how you respond to others too, because you are relieved from the ignorance that you had as a kid. And the pride part of it too. That's a hard thing to swallow, is to let go of the pride. Like, I believed I was superior, of course.
Yeah.
But I'm not.
I mean, I was the one that was. Yeah, I was the one that was going to beat it. Like, I'm the smart one.
That's right. And how did that work out?
Right.
Not so well. And the sucky thing is to admit failure to your pride. Like, I was so arrogant and prideful, and this isn't working, and to have to admit to yourself, I am just as a equal a failure. But the crazy thing is, if you look at it from a distance, everything that you've done, all of the studying and dedication and work and obsessive compulsiveness that you didn't realize was obsessive compulsive, everything that you've been doing, if this is what it equates to, could you imagine what it would take to find that level of success you thought you could reach?
Right.
Holy crap, man. Like, is that what any human being should have to commit to just to prove that they are better? Superior? Do you want that superiority if it takes more than what you've already done? Just to prove that you're not a failure like your grandparents, right?
No.
That's insane. That would be inhumane. No human being should have to work that hard, isolate themselves that much, obsess all of your brain energy and power devoted to this. So you have no freedom to focus on anything else because it requires that much focus, right? To where everything else is blacked out from thought.
Yeah.
So you've been doing that, and what has happened to your health, to your body, to your mental health, right? To your behavior? Did it really pan out the way you thought it would as a kid, right? The evidence is showing it's worse. It actually is worse, if not the cause of the actual issue that you were judging prior.
Right, it could easily be the cause.
Well, of course.
Yeah.
Right? So that compassion, by going into your failure, right? That willingness to swallow the pride and go, if I have to be this way, is it really something to be ashamed of or to be embarrassed about?
Right.
It's only worthy of shame and embarrassment if you still ignorantly believe the stigma around lazy, they don't care, they don't have any willpower. Well, you have all of those. You have so much willpower that it's driving you crazy.
Yeah.
So is that really true? They don't want it enough. They don't care about their health. Is that true?
No.
Not at all, right? So you can look at this and go, really, the ignorance that creates the stigma ultimately is why you've been suffering so long, because you don't realize at some point that the ignorance is wrong and your reality isn't working either. So when do you flip this around to say, I don't need to feel ashamed of this. I know the power and emphasis I've put on my health and weight in my lifetime. I don't need to apologize to anybody. And if anybody, to include family, friends, whatever, judges you for quitting, truly, that's like you kind of have to give them the grace of the ignorance that you had. They just don't get it.
Yeah.
They just don't get it. So I don't need to even take them seriously or defend myself? Like, should you have to defend yourself to someone else who's stigmatizing you as lazy for why you are relieving yourself of that insanity?
So I think it's a lot about, I remember watching your videos, and then our first, like maybe 3 or 4 sessions, you talked a lot about humility and grace, and I really didn't understand what that was. Like, I just was like, yeah, okay, I have to be humble. And yeah, I mean, that really is the key, or at least it was for me, is just admitting finally that I have no control over, that I don't want to, that I don't need to, and that I don't know anything.
Yeah, it's an admittance of failure. It's going into your fear.
I don't need to know anything about this, and I can just let it be what it is, because I don't need to study it.
No, because that's not doing anything. It's not improving anything. It hasn't affected anything except that you've become more and more having more fear around it and angst. It's promoted this psychological issue around it. Right. Is what it's done. Yeah. That's what I mean by the suffering. Like, holy crap. Like, you can't get a break from thinking about it. You can't get a break. You can't breathe anymore. And it takes over your mind. You have no freedom to think. You have no freedom to relax because you're so fixated on finding a solution. And that fixation was absolutely backed by the ignorance you had around your own grandparents' obesity. Right? So I can see why when you go into that, is it forgivable? Right? And how that translates really to you first. You have to go into your own forgivability. The first part of that, as you just recognized, is the humility of swallowing pride. I failed. I was wrong. That's humility. That's like saying I'm on my hands and knees and my palms are up and I'm white flag. It's over. I lost. I've lost the battle, and I lost with this insane amount of effort. So how much more effort does it take to win when the effort I'm putting in is hijacking my entire freaking life and my physical well-being? You know what I mean? Because it's not translating into physical well-being. It's not. Like you thought and believed and fantasized about. It's not translating to a physical reward at all. So, there's all that focus into it, but most people won't get there without going into the reality of staying this way, because that's the risk, right? They have to open their mind to that. Breathe it into their lungs and go into it, like you had said, realistically. I have to look at this now as if it's realistic, as if it's going to happen, and I can't back away, because that's ultimately the risk. If I'm not willing to go into that risk, I'm not going to look at it. I'm going to continue on this wheel, and there's like a rat wheel. It just doesn't stop because you can't face it, right? Yeah. So by facing it, you're actually looking at what you're running from. It's like you never really stopped to look at it. You stopped to look at it, and what happened for you?
So when I stopped to look at it, I just went into like sadness, sadness, emotional.
Yep.
Yeah.
You're going through the grieving process. You go through like a death. It's like mourning. Absolutely. You are right on target. That's what it feels like. Yeah. It feels like this loss of a war. It's like you just lost. It's like the aftermath and there's smoke and rain and you're just done. It's like failure. And you are so right when you say it's sad. It is. But to get there takes so much, that humility to put down the weapons, right? To put down the weapon of your, cleanse. The weapon, those are your weapons, right? Those are the ways you try to protect yourself from going there. And it is really sad, especially when you look at the factual outcome. It's like you never would have thought that this is how this was going to end. You gambled on the fantasy and you fought really hard for that fantasy because you believed it was real for a long time. And you never quit and you never gave up and you dedicated so much of yourself to it. You honored what you did it the honorable way, right? So even in your failure, even in the loss of this, are you forgivable? Is it forgivable?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
That's where the grace is. The humility is putting down the weapons and accepting failure. The grace is forgiving yourself because you put so much effort.
Yeah.
You really did an amazing job. And it still created the loss, which is insane when you look at it. You're like, holy crap. If this creates loss, I can't imagine what creates the win. It's almost unreachable, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think, as I've been working with you I think it's almost a year. We definitely took breaks here and there, but I've been teaching this way because I believe in it now. I've been teaching it to my girl who's 13, she just turned 13. And she's a beautiful girl. She has always been able to stop eating. She eats to hunger just naturally, like in your book.
Yeah, you've been able to protect her from some of that fear.
You talk about how children eat, or I think it's you that talks about how children eat, and when you're just so hungry that you can't stand it another minute, and you run inside and have like a couple bites and then go out and play again because you want to play.
Yeah, you're having more fun playing than eating. The food becomes a secondary thing. That's an absolute sign of someone that's in that higher states of well-being. They don't have that fear that food's going away. They don't have to manage any of that. So the good news, Mama, is that you did not pass down some of that crazy train. And you absolutely could have by fearing her. You don't want to gain weight. You don't want to get fat. You don't want to be diseased. You can't eat that. You didn't pressurize it that bad. You weren't that insane.
Well, so I knew, because before I even had a child, I knew my dogma wasn't right. I just didn't know why or how to replace it. I just knew that I had to do this once a year, do this like crazy cleanse thing so that I could lose weight.
Yeah, and you kept it private. Yeah.
Yeah, I kept it private. Absolutely kept it private.
Yeah, that's important.
When she started to notice was maybe like 2 years ago, and that's when I started to be like, all right, I can't pass my crazy down. I don't want like that. My job as a human right now is to raise as best I can, like you say, we with humility and grace. We really don't know what we're doing as far as parenting goes, but I'm trying to do my best, right?
And that's pretty much what everybody's doing, right?
Yeah, all the time we're trying to do our best. And I'm trying to do my best for that person, not for me. I'm not trying to re-raise myself. I'm trying to raise that person. Right?
Yeah, that's pretty. That right there, what you just said, takes a level of awareness that you've understood even from your own upbringing. That your parents probably projected themselves onto you, thinking, right, brings us back down to what we talked to when we first started, right? That I'm doing what's right for me, and it's going to be right for them because I'm scared, and I'm scared for them, and I don't want them to have that, right?
Right, exactly. And I learned that from you. I mean, I bowed down to that idea from the very beginning. I got that right away from you. Was, you're parenting in a way that you wish you had been parented.
Which makes it about you.
Well, exactly. But how is it that how is it that that's the right thing for your daughter? How do you know that? Right?
Yeah.
How do you know? And it's not possible for you to know. And so that was a place that I was able to find a lot of humility. Right? Because I was super righteous about my parenting too. I was like, no, this is how it's supposed to be.
Because it would have worked great for you. It would have been what you needed, man. And it's not black and white. That doesn't mean that what you needed isn't what they need. You just have to give it tons of grace and lenience, right? But you might present something, and if it doesn't work for them, you got to let it go.
Yeah.
Right? I might present to my kids a political foundation that I've learned, and I got to let them create their own idea of what they believe politically. And let them figure it, right? Even though it brings me some dissonance, you got to let them figure it out. Right? So, so ultimately this week, what happened to your angst after you went into looking at the picture in reality? You know, going through the sadness. Go back to that. You went, it feels sad. And then did it change? Did that sadness change in any way?
Not yet. I think it's still, I'm still grieving about not having a emotionally open relationship with people because of their size. Body shaming throughout my life has been a constant, comparing and making sure I'm not that big, and then going back and thinking about all of the things that I've done over the years and all of the people that I've done it with and to. I'm a little bit in that sadness, and I'll process it and let it go. I think.
Well, you have to. But you're still in that grace phase then, where you realize I did the best I could with what I knew. I didn't know any better. I never questioned.
Yeah. Starting
with my grandparents. So if I'm going to shame my grandparents that way, no wonder I'm going to project that onto everybody else. That's you. That's your system, and you believed it was the right thing to do. So if you don't question it, can you see why that would happen and why that is absolutely forgivable? You didn't know. That's right. Where ignorance really is. It is forgivable because.
Right, and I lived with an orthorexic narcissist who also did her own cleanses and her own, body shaming, and
you don't question it.
Told me, yeah.
So if you don't question it, you're never really given the opportunity to understand the whole picture. You're seeing it from that one side and projecting it onto everything as if it's right. That's that fight or flight reaction. That's like clearly someone overreaching or grasping really hard to something, thinking that it keeps them safe and making that safety a superior form of safety. And obviously open your mind around your upbringing. So you really just transferred that way of being into body image. That's what I did. I went from religion to body image. It was the same religion, same structure, different religion. Make sense?
Yeah.
And it's really understandable too when you have trauma in your life, why your brain would go into such extreme coping mechanisms or extreme reaching to try to find safety. It made sense to me after having sexual assault and having, left home and failing so horribly relative to the standards of the perfect religion, right? Relative to that religion that made me feel shame. It wasn't reality, right? That trauma was like post-traumatic stress. I lived with post-traumatic stress, and can you see why then you would gravitate so intensely to trying to find some sense of value, some sense of worth? This is where you have to look at your story as if you're reading it in a book and go, all of this makes sense. Under these circumstances, with this upbringing, with this environment, you didn't know any different. It absolutely makes sense. You shouldn't be feeling bad about it, as if you knew and have some superior spiritual level of awareness and chose to do something different. No, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I do.
So you gotta forgive yourself. Okay, you have to have the humility
that might be the hardest part that I go through. Self-compassion is something I need to work at.
Okay, well that is ultimately, if you don't know how to have compassion for yourself, how do you know what it feels like to have compassion for others?
Yeah.
It's impossible. Some of this might be letting go of the superiority that you've been using to cope for feeling inferior and going into the inferiority of everything. And accepting that ultimately, if you were to just be truthful about your wholeness and the realness inside, that it's inferior relative to the narcissism. Because really, it's not inferior. It is.
What's inferior to the narcissism?
The way you really are, your truth. The truth of your actual understanding of life is totally inferior. Narcissism ultimately is what it does is it creates this drive to find some sense of superiorism, right? I need to be superior. Yeah. And which means perfection, knowing it all, knowing more, having more, being, you've got to have some form of proof that you are a superior person that is holier and higher and more righteous in some form, right? Whether it's consumption, education, body image, healthy image, whatever the system you're using, what you're doing is you're trying to cope for feeling inferior, like fear of being seen as inferior. So if you actually go into your truth, your reality, you are absolutely an inadequate failure on many levels compared to the narcissistic standards that are always rising. There's no social environment that you're going to go into that you are not superior, you are not inferior in.
Yeah.
So when you go into the like, if I were to just be real and true and just come out of the closet as this person that's doing the best she can, that means that I can't do better than that.
Yeah.
Like, come out of the closet is the truth of where I'm at. That means that I can't continue to promote something better than that because that's a lie. So you go into the permanence of being inferior to that way of being. What that does is it gives you the keys to unlocking what people think is not recoverable. They believe narcissism is not recoverable. Guess what? That's not true.
Yeah, no.
The moment that person is willing to be seen as inferior.
The key to recovery from narcissism for me is just to stop pretending.
Correct. You are right. It's like, that's when you say stop pretending, what I'm saying is tell the truth. You are to just be real about your heart and soul and your integrity. It really means you're not good enough. That's how it translates in narcissism, is you're inadequate. It sucks. It's not good enough. Someone out there is doing it better than you. You don't know enough. You don't have enough. You are totally inferior. That's how it feels internally. So, in other words, for a narcissist to recover, they have to have the humility and the grace to admit failure, to admit inferiority. So the humility is in the admittance of it. If I tell the goddamn truth, I am actually not that good. To my own system, right? It's relative to that superiority. If I tell the truth, I'm inferior. If I tell the truth, I'm inadequate. And that's how I feel inside, right? If I tell the truth compared to everybody else, I think everybody knows more than me, right? So if I just come out of the closet, that's the humility. The next part in recovery is grace. And I am lovable. Even in my failure, complete inferiority, it is actually okay. And I'm still lovable. That's the forgiveness part of it. Does that give you maybe a better understanding about where and when you need these specific, where the grace needs to be, where the humility needs to be, where you need to implement those two?
Yeah, and I have to work on it because I've even started to have a superiority around my recovery.
Oh yeah, well I have seen that before. That's like spiritual ego.
it's like, well, because of course I'm surrounded by this supremacists like we all are. I'm not saying I should be special. But yeah, I have a lot of thin supremacy around me, and I am at the place where I can say, well, they just don't get it.
Okay, right? See, that's because you're missing, you're really not even recovered, because you're missing a very important step to the process, which is grace. If you don't have grace, it's impossible to give others grace around it. Notice how, for example, when you're going back into, talking about going back into either another round of the protocol or going back into another cleanse, notice how in that discussion that I didn't judge it. That I think that's an important part of the process. That doesn't define you as a failure or a sucky person, right? That detachment from what they're doing is defining how sucky they are or they're inferior. Yeah, I think you're right. I think you identified that I'm having some issues because I'm starting to feel superior in my recovery process. That means you need to back down again. You need to go back down in the process. And you need to be very solid in the grace part of this and humility. You got to go back through it again. Just go through it again. Go observe it again. Bring it into reality again. And go through the humility again to admit if what I've done is failure. I would that's like in terms of religion. If how much effort I put into being the right person, the righteous way equates to me feeling bad, I'd rather go to hell than to go into the heaven of what it takes to get there. Because if what I'm doing is inadequate, I don't want heaven. Right? So in terms of the health righteousness, what you're doing is inadequate. Do you really want the euphoria? Do you really want the, right? So you go into giving the humility of failure. You need to have a little bit more of those too. So I think you're getting it. I really do. The fact that you're even acknowledging, oh, I'm starting to have this sense of superiority in my recovery. That's a big deal that you even can see that. Awesome.
Yeah.
Right? So as the guide here, all I'm saying is, all right, that's good that you can even witness that. You need to go back down into the process again. And you need to really breathe into your lungs. You need to open your eyes even more. You need to open your eyes.
Yeah.
Right? So it's kind of like going into, the way it felt for me, the way I describe it is it's like going into a room that the boogeyman's in. And you're like, okay, I'm going to go into the room where the boogeyman is in, which is a big step, right? But I'm going to keep my eyes shut and I'm going to curl into a ball.
Yeah.
And I'm going to just breathe until I feel like he's gone. So I really did make a step in just being willing to be present with the boogeyman, but I really didn't go through the full process of, you need to look at him. You need to talk to him. You need to, and assume he's going to kill you anyway. So you got to breathe it into your lungs, ask questions. Be like, now you need to have a conversation with the boogeyman, right? So that's maybe what you need to do is now go back into that room and now open your eyes. Breathe in, breathe it in.
Yeah.
And what you'll find is to do that, it takes even more humility. It takes even more, there's more of that you have to bring to the table. And once you go through the humility of, I have failed, I am even at my best, it's inadequate, and then realizing I put the effort, the energy, the heart and soul is how I'm going to define myself now, not by the outcome or the facade, which is the narcissism. And you go into the heart and soul of it and you realize that you really are honorable and it's forgivable. So there's the grace. I have all this grace. And because I didn't know better. And I don't want to play the game of knowing better anymore. I am surrendering this. I'm surrendering the game of I know more than them.
Yeah.
I don't want it. I want to just be where I'm at and have grace to do that. And what happens when you go through that grace is you realize that everybody else is doing the same thing. They're doing the same thing. They're doing the best they can with where they're at, with what they believe in, and they should have grace too. They clearly aren't suffering as bad as you have, or aren't aware that they're suffering. They're still managing the suffering with the euphoria of the fantasy. They don't know that the fantasy doesn't exist yet. And in the end, they need to figure that out on their own time. They may never figure that out. Who knows? It's really not your life to manage. But you can give them the grace that you've given yourself to realize everybody's doing the best they can with what they're aware of. Everybody. Right. There's not one human being who is aware of better and choosing shitty.
Yeah, I suppose that's probably true. Even like a heroin addict.
Correct. Even a heroin addict who has really lost who doesn't understand it, who doesn't know why they're doing it, who doesn't, just like a binge eater who doesn't really understand why they're doing it, who really doesn't get why they are so obsessed. No different than the heroin addict, right? It's no different than forgiving the health supremacy addict who is so hyper focused on something to such an extreme level that it impacts their actual health in a negative way. They don't even see it.
Yeah.
No different than it's the same thing. And if you get to be forgiven and you get to feel that grace of I'm doing the best I can with what I've known, and I've never done anything other than that, and you always have hindsight. So once you have hindsight, then you can change what you're doing. But you haven't really had hindsight until you have the humility to have hindsight. It takes humility to go, oh man, I wish I would have known better and done better. Someone who doesn't have humility would never admit. They would rather do the same thing over and over again to prove that they've never done something wrong, right? The pride, right? The moment you have the humility to eat your freaking pride and to be okay with that, to be okay with, you know what? I'm failing, I'm struggling, but my effort is so honorable. I mean, the honor in your effort, it really is. I'm not being sarcastic. I'm being really truthful when I say that to you. Like, wow, man, think of the power. That's a lot of something to be proud of, really. Is how incredible the human brain is in powering that insanity. When it comes to life and death, you give it life and death. Holy crap, the brain has a ton of power in that amygdala and that hypothalamus that controls that response, right? Basically hijacks your entire frontal cortex and enslaves every thought to fixing it, and to realize that doesn't work. At least in a first world environment, it's not working. It might work well in a third world environment. That's really what that whole entire response was meant for. True life and death, not facade life and death. But your brain doesn't know the difference. So, and you're not so holier than thou that you knew the difference because you didn't. And you got to be okay to say, holy crap. And that doesn't make me a bad person. And that doesn't make them who are doing it right now a bad person either, because I've been there. And I understand it. And you know what? They'll figure it out. And in the meantime, I'm going to give them the grace to figure it out.
Yeah. And some people can spend their whole lives as thin supremacists and live and die on a diet. And that's okay. That's their path.
They're willing to sacrifice a significant amount of exploration and relationships for it too. So they'll figure it out, and it's none of your business.
It's just like marrying within your own faith. Like, you have to find a partner that believes in that too, or else, that becomes very
It's
silly.
You're correct. You are seeing a more broad picture of the process right now too. It's like, oh
yeah.
And then
you raise your kids that way, and then they try to indoctrinate their friends, and that's part of what I'm running up against now is with a kid in middle school.
Mm-hmm.
um, like cushioning her from, bubble wrapping her from the idea that, ice cream is bad.
Yeah. Yeah. And just to say it's the one thing that I do with my own kids is like, well, that's actually true what they're saying. I don't say it's not true. It's actually true when you eat a lot. Like if you eat way too much, it'll make you sick.
Yeah.
So I never say they're wrong, right? It's kind of like too with like politics. Well, of course that's true. If this were the case, this would make sense.
Yeah.
So it's true. It's relative to that perspective, to that energy that they bring to it, to that fear that they have. Of course we need to do this. That would make sense. Unfortunately, reality doesn't match their fear and the drive. So that's why it doesn't make sense what they're doing. Because what they're doing is relative to their emotional state of mind, not necessarily reality. Right? So of course ice cream can be bad for you. If you eat it all the time, way too much, and you make yourself sick all the time. Of course. It's true. The difference is having some ice cream can be very healthy. It really can. It can be pleasurable. It can be symbolic of connection with others, which is an important part of our wiring too. You just want to make sure you're hungry and don't get sick. Don't make yourself sick.
So I explained the table of abundance and why it's okay to have ice cream for breakfast if that's what you feel like doing, if that's what your body wants. To my girl, and I talked about the fear of food as becoming triggering your brain. And she finished the sentence and said, and that's why people get fat, because they think that food is dangerous. And
in part, yes, that's one perspective, of course, right?
It's totally a very shorthanded way of explaining, like, when we say some foods are bad, when we're health righteous, when we're orthorexic, right? And we assign danger to certain foods.
Yeah, life, death, no grace, all nothing, and don't forget the shame. It's not just danger, it's shame and terrible and sucky and judgy McJudgerpants. That's the other part. That's the pride component.
So I brought her to that place, and I was like, and remember when I used to say, that's poison, you should never eat that, like, and remember when I wouldn't eat a donut, remember all that? And she was like, yeah. And
God, I'm so glad you're using yourself as the example, by the way. That takes humility. But that's the most powerful teacher, I think, too, with your kids. Is to say, I used to do that. And I've learned the hard way that it's not all or nothing. That there's a middle ground in that.
So she got it and finished the thought of like, yeah, and that would make you think that you're in a famine, and so you wouldn't. So anything you eat, any food that you eat would make you hold on to it.
Yes, because biologically your endocrine system is now inflamed because of that fear. On top of that. So it's not just the idea that something is more power hormonally to your body, such as ice cream, but your fear of that ice cream actually magnifies the biological reaction to that food. When you combine those two, your body is meant to gain fat. It's supposed to do that based on thousands of years of evolution around famine. So it's actually doing a good job. The body is.
Yeah.
And when you see someone who is morbidly obese, typically, in not all cases, but typically you're looking at someone who is in a state of famine, a chronic state of famine, to where it's been long enough and consistent enough that their body has accumulated that much, adipose tissue.
Yeah.
It's a sign of pre-famine behavior and famine biology. which would be lower thyroid over higher adrenals, more fight or flight response. They're probably in a state of fear, right? More sensitive to life circumstances. Oftentimes, too, it's a sign that someone is feeling deprived in their mind, which comes from a state of entitlement and then compensation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. So it's amazing. It really is pretty cool. Okay, so I gotta go. I've got another client waiting for me.
Thank you, Robin.
So